Okay, Greg, you're good to go.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Greg Price, and Taylor and I are co-chairs of your Dallas FM Pro user group. And for today, Friday, August the 6th, the announcements that we have today are pretty spare. We got an announcement this week that FileMaker has introduced Cloud 2, version 2 this week. Taylor, do we know when that's actually available, or is it available right away?
Mine already upgraded last night, so okay. I'm already in version 2. It automatically happened.
So that's the big news. And I believe since the last meeting, we have the newer update to the FileMaker Pro desktop application, which fixes the problem with PDFs in containers, specifically on Windows. And I don't think that there's anything else new in the software area. We have no additional details, as far as I know, of Engage and what's going to be going on with Engage this year since the last meeting. And that's it. Taylor, anything I'm missing?
Nothing that I can think of offhand.
Okay. Well, as usual, I'd like to reiterate that anyone who's interested in putting on a presentation for the users group, or if anybody has any ideas about presentations that they would like for the users group, please feel free to reach out to Taylor or myself. You can go ahead and email us, text us. Our information is all on the FMPUG website. With no additional information, I'm just going to go ahead and pass off the baton to Mr. Taylor Sharp, whose presentation today is going to be all about virtual lists. Taylor, go ahead.
Greetings, everyone. Good to be here with you. I did think of one other announcement I had forgot about, but Pause on Error is coming up in October. And since Engage this year is virtual and that doesn't inspire me, I'm going to go to my first Pause on Error. So anyway, I don't know if anybody else is going to do that, but Pause on Error is in person. It's in Georgia. So anyway, I guess it's 3 days in Georgia there. So anyway, that's one
outdoor event.
Yes, it's at some retreat center there. So anyway.
And anyone who has an outstanding ticket from the last Pause on Error can get credit, I think full credit for admission to the current one.
Oh, even better, even better. So anyway, if you're thinking about it, I'll encourage you to go. I'm going, so we'll see what it's going to be like. So anyway, of course, I'm looking forward to DevCon/Engage getting back to its normal stuff, and I'm sure that will happen in 2022, and that will be fun and exciting then. So, but back to what we're doing today. Let's see, I'm going to change my screen share back to here. Okay, hopefully you guys are seeing my screen now.
Yep.
And we're going to turn off our editing and get back to what we're doing here. A twist on virtual lists. So first of all, to start off with, I'm going to do a little bit of assuming that everybody has done at least a little bit about virtual lists, but just as a big picture end of things, we in the FileMaker realm, or the framework that we work in, we are very used to working in very specific contexts as determined by a particular layout. So whatever layout and whatever relationships we have to that particular table occurrence is, all that we readily have available in our traditional FileMaker toolkit. But there are obviously times that we would like to get information or do things with data that is elsewhere or independent of other users. And so, one of the things that FileMaker has always had is this unique little feature of how global fields work. If you haven't worked with global fields, they are a value that is set and that value is available to all other contexts throughout the solution. So if you set a global field in one table, you can be in another layout that is not related to that table and still call that global field, and it'll still work for you. Global fields are set to your session. So what you have in a global field belongs to you, does not belong to anybody else. So that also has some user interface benefits to deal with. You're not modifying sometimes data that other people are looking at the same time. So there's some definite place for that to be used. And I will mention one other little quirk about global fields. Your global field is not, it does not save what your global field was when you exit. So when you come back in, your global field will also not be what it was there the last time you were there. What it actually will be there is what the global field was the last time someone opened the database locally on a computer, not on the server. So that means you have to take it off the server, open it locally, and then if you set a global variable, a global field, it will stay that way. And then everybody who opens it from then on, even when you host it back on the server, it will stay that value. And of course, sometimes you don't want that to happen. And you can play on first window open script triggers to clear them out or whatever. But anyway, that's a weird little tweak on them. However, the deal was when we're talking about global fields is we were looking at ways to deal with data that is unique to a particular session, a user that's not necessarily shared with other people. Bob was reminding me yesterday, there was a person, this is probably about, I think it was about the 2007 timeframe, had a realization that we could have this concept of virtual data and accessing that through virtual lists. And his name is, was it Bruce Robertson? I think it's Bruce Robertson. Realized that, hey, we can, within a session, we can make either a global field or a virtual global variable, $$ variable, and in essence have some unique values to that particular session. So why would you, want unique values? Well, one of the most common things that happen is we're all, most of us are quite familiar with, if you want to go somewhere and you want to click, like, for example, in a field that has a list of values, we're, familiar with the example we have here where you click and up comes a value list. Now, one of the frustrating things about value lists is they can only be based on either hard-coded data that you put in or based on the index of a field that already exists. What you can't do is do a calculation and say, here's a calculation that says what my value list, and to take other things into account, such as maybe your context or who's logged in or something like that. And so our value lists have some strange flexibility in that they can be connected to a second field, but it is all kind of a workaround thing that can be done, but it's not very elegant in my terms. So a lot of times, many of us have reverted to using a newer feature that came out, card windows. Card windows are nice to, because a card window pops up, and here I'll show you, here's a card window, and we can size this card window however we want. We can really control what data is in there. We can go to a particular layout and do a find, and based on that context, find things that are different than the parent window that's been grayed out around here. We can do all kinds of unique things that go beyond what you can do like in a value list or a popover. So that's very nice, except sometimes when you're popping over things, your list that's going to pop up, you want to make that unique to the user that is there. So It may be that based on when you click this popover, you want to see a list of data that is based on, it could be the time of day, the user that's logged in, if they're in the marketing versus the IT department or whatever. And so what we don't have is the ability in the value list to do a calculated value list. So in essence, what we can do is we can use virtual lists. So a number of us are familiar with virtual lists, and kind of the old school way of doing it is we frequently, the way we worked around getting outside of context in FileMaker is the number one tool that a lot of us use is SQL. We will execute SQL to get a usually short lists of things. It works real well for short lists. And SQL is an extension of FileMaker that lets you use a tool that's outside of FileMaker. FileMaker is not natively SQL, but it lets us use SQL statements. And the advantage of a SQL statement, it is not dependent upon the context of the layout that we're in. So that gives us some power to work outside of things. And it particularly works well for virtual lists. So some of the things that we started out doing on virtual lists is we would make some type of SQL. So here's a SQL that runs right here. And this SQL, I've just dumped some comptroller database stuff in here. We've got a table here. I'll go show you our table of comptroller data. I think I grabbed everything that is in the city of Addison. So anyway, we got some data to play with right here. So if you have a sales and use tax permit, you would be in that list. That would not, of course, be harmonic data. I assume you don't sell retail stuff. So, but
well, FileMaker.
Yes.
But not retail. Yeah.
Well,
No, that's retail.
that it can be. Well, I don't know. The question is, do you collect sales tax on that and pay it to the comptroller? Oh, well, then you probably are in that list. Okay. Oh, this is Dallas.
Okay. No, well, we are in Addison.
Is this Addison?
But we're in a Dallas zip code. But we are in Addison. I'm pretty sure we pay that. 17501.
Okay, well.
We're 65254, so we use a different code. Sorry,
interesting.
Just check to see if you actually downloaded that.
Well, okay, well, let's see. That's, of course, this only does it if your address said it, but let's see, harmonic data. No, harmonic's not showing up. You don't have some other strange corporate parent name or so. Okay, just checking. Well, it's not showing up there. It may be that you're in Dallas because of the zip code or something. Yeah. But anyway, there are a couple of thousand records here, and it's something just to play with. So if you ever need a play with database, there are a lot of things like that you can get on the web, or if you need one, I'll send you the taxpayer controller database to really bore you to death. But anyway, so we've got some report array here that we're going to create a virtual list from. And so we do this simply by creating a $$ variable. And so I'm going to run this script to say, let's create a virtual list using this $$ report array simple. So I now have created, if we go to our data viewer, we can see $$ report array simple. This is a simple array. And by simple, I mean, and this is how we originally did things, all your fields are separated by a tab and all your records are separated by a carry return. This works great, long as you don't have tabs and carry returns in your fields or other things like that. But for basic simple things, it seemed to work for a lot of things. And this is kind of how virtual lists started out. What do you want to be in your virtual list that you're going to show right now? And we can display that information just using a virtual list. So we can run a little SQL call, and that information is available. And in this case, it's available by clicking on the card. And from that virtual list, I've told it to pick just two fields, the zip code and the field name, but all of that other information is in there. And this is all being displayed in a virtual list. But how's that being displayed? We have things in dollar variable field, and I'm seeing this in FileMaker fields. Well, the reason is because these fields are calculation fields that look at that dollar variable and pull the data out of it based on the record and field that it's looked at. So in this case here, we'll go look at the simple array here that we've done here. We've got a table that we create here. Here's just called the simple array table. And in this table, we've got 10 fields, record and record number. Okay, so first of all, record is going to look over at that dollar variable. And from that dollar variable, we're going to say, what record number are we on? And we're going to pull out just that record, and it's going to be shared through that comes from there so that we can get a particular record. And then from that record, each of these fields grabs from the record, which, you know, field value is in that field. And that way, this data, as you will see, while we have to create records in this report array, this simple report array, we don't actually create any data. It's all the data is by calculation. So if we go over here, just a second. Yeah,
it's a small.
it
gets infested.
Let me go mute just a couple. Wait there a
So
second.
he's saying you got to
Okay.
trench out, put it in a wider.
Why is it not? Why is it doing this? There we go. I'm moving slowly.
Do you think that roots have grown into the drain pipe?
There we go. Okay. Okay, so we're all good on that. Okay.
There we go.
Anyway, we're back at we have the virtual list table is all nothing but calculations. So we have in the virtual list table, this simple array right here, as you can see, everything is based on what's in dollar report array, and what's in dollar report array is dependent upon your session and if you've run that script. So if I'm using this same database and I run a script and create this dollar report array, I'm going to see something different than Heather's going to see if she goes and does the same thing. And that can be very beneficial because sometimes we want to display, particularly in user interfaces, we want to display limited data based on information about who's logged in for them to select from. We don't want to share that. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'll be embarrassed to say way back in the day, I used to create tables and I would say, we're all using this one shared table for doing these virtual list things. And I would say, every time you wanted to do a find and display things, you would assign a key to that. And I would know that that key only belongs to this particular found thing, and we were saving the records, and then I'd have to remember at some point to go back and delete the records. And then of course, then you have the problem of security where people are seeing, could see other people's shared data across there, and that's fine in some cases, but in other cases where like you've got that HR department that doesn't want to share social security numbers or something, no bueno. So all kinds of, you know, not only logistics problems, but you have security issues. So it was so nice when Bruce came up with the concept of virtual lists that I can have a table that's all based on calculations, that's based on a returned value list. And while you could do it, I've done it in SQL, you could actually just loop through and do a find and save that data into a global variable. So you don't have to use SQL just to do it. It's just SQL is a very easy way to do it if you already know SQL. So if you know, it makes, you know, generating these virtual lists very, very easy. Now, of course, everything we've talked about so far is just kind of the plain Jane virtual list that we've done up to this point here. So some of the problems I started running into on virtual lists, as you noticed when we looked at the fields here over on my simple virtual list, you'll notice these fields, if you look at the calculation, if you look down here, you can see that they're all text fields. Well, yeah, that works for most things, but until it doesn't. So sometimes I want it to be a number. Sometimes I want it to be a date. Oh, and to make things even fun, SQL has its own little date format, which is not the common US format, which is also not the common European format or whatever. But anyway, everything, has its way of doing it. And sometimes you're like, well, I don't want just the way SQL returns things. So I want to be able to say, hey, we're going to improve our report array, and we're going to go to where not only does it pull the data, but it also gives you the option of calculating it as a date or a number or time or timestamp. So we, in essence, make our calculation list grow a lot. But this is, useful for the virtual list so that you can, for example, if you have a number that's currency, if it's just come back as text and you want to format it, you're not going to get your $sign in your period 00 or whatever, but you can with a number. So, so it's useful to have the calculation. So basically what we have here in the report array simple plus is we've just, we've, what are you seeing?
You're running calculations on every field.
Yes.
Just, let's assume it's a thing. Now you have timestamp or time. That's, wow, okay.
So for field 1, we have 4 different calculations of field 1. Well, actually 5, excuse me, I can't count. So for field 1, we're going to go to the $$ array. We're going to pull the whole thing down. And then for this particular record, we're going to pull 1 record. And for field 1, we're going to do 5 calculations, or potentially up to 5 calculations. Now, granted, when you pull a layout on, it's only going to calculate the one that it's on. So it doesn't calculate them all out every time. But to be available, you have to, in the virtual list to use, you have to do the calculation ahead of time. So in creating your virtual list, it also makes your virtual list fields get really, really long. So if you have 5 times everything, but it does work. It was the first step for improvement. So I could now on my virtual list have formatted dates and formatted currencies and things like that. So that was report away simple plus. And then right around FileMaker 16, is that when JSON stuff came out, I think? I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Somewhere right around there. We get this new tool, and of course we've been doing everything with these, field separators of carry returns and tabs, and also periodically running into the problem where there's a tab or carry return in the field that shouldn't be there, and it messes up our virtual lists. And that was a common thing that would happen. And of course you'd say, why did you put a carry return in that field? But anyway, and then the customer would say, well, why did you let me put it in there if I wasn't supposed to? So anyway, so anyway, along came JSON and some of the, among other things, even though you don't want those things in there, JSON handles a lot of those kind of things. But the question is, how do you use JSON for your virtual list? And so this is where we did a little bit more of a twist on things, that we started doing JSON. And so the example I've done here is I've basically done the same SQL, but I've spun it into JSON. And so we've got this simple array normal with tabs and carry returns, and we've got the simple array in JSON. And actually, why don't I format it so it'll not look so ugly? By the way, if you do these things, you'll end up doing while statements a lot. But if you haven't used while, it's a wonderful feature that will drive you nuts, but give you lots of power. That's a whole other session though. Okay, let's see. Create me a readable JSON. Okay, so now let's go back here. Look at our data viewer. And now we're going to see the same thing, only it's nice and formatted instead of all just run together. It's the same data that we were looking at before over here. But in reality, it's actually a lot more readable. So among other benefits that came with JSON is when we format it, hey, it's readable. So this, made debugging, what's not working, a whole lot easier. So I really enjoyed that about JSON. And of course, we're all exploring things on it. So, but it also meant that you had to change your virtual array table that does these calculations on it, because your original one wouldn't work with that because it's looking the wrong way. So we created the JSON version of the same thing. And so this is, it looks the same to the user right here. You're seeing the same fields and same values, but as you can see over here, we've got something different. So first of all, when we get the record, we do get the record number, but we are going to get our fields, which, why aren't they sorting right? Here we go. Now they're sorted right. We're going to have to change our formula on how to get the data that comes across. So we're going to have to use our JSON get element to get whatever we're looking at. This one is a date field. Let's go to text field. It's the simplest, I think. So this is where we get the information, and we have to also, the other thing too about JSON goes in name value pairs. So one of the other benefits was in JSON when we did things is, you will notice in that array that we were looking at, if you look at the original basic array, there are no field names here. You just have to know that the third field is, I don't know, address or city or something, okay? One of the wonderful things about JSON is it includes the field names. Now, you could argue that it adds a bunch of length to things, and yeah, it does. So maybe it's not as efficient, but you'll find out the JSON tools are extremely fast in the most part. There are some Achilles heels to them, but for the most part, they are extremely fast, and having field names in there doesn't hurt performance. But it also makes it a whole lot easier to read, particularly when you have something like here. If I just saw this number here, is that the taxpayer number? Is that a zip code gone wrong? Or is that a, phone number or whatever? So it becomes really nice. But likewise, when we switched over to trying to do a JSON virtual array, we also need to get the field names. So in addition to getting the value out of the array, we needed to get the field name out of the array so that we could display that when they're in there. So in the calculation, you'll see that we're getting a field name array pair, so that when you look over here, you'll actually say, here's field 1. We have to calculate what the field name is, and then we calculate what the field value is. And of course, look here, here's our date that's, I guess it's ISO SQL formatted, which works great for sorting and things like that, but it's not what most of my clients are looking for. So if I come up here and turn on the date field, now, as you can see over here, since I turned the date one on, open it up a little bit more, we'll see this is more of how things are done in the US, this first column, than the way it comes back in SQL. So in SQL, it's just all, remember, SQL always returns things in text, no matter what you called SQL. If you called it a date field, timestamp, or whatever, SQL is always text. So if you want it to be something else, you got to convert it. So there's some wonderful things about SQL, but you got to keep some things in mind. And so in this case here, we had to convert it to date. But now that we've got it converted to date, we can, in our user interface, we can format it, among other things. So that's very useful in our virtual list, that we can now format things because they are done in this virtual list. So some things that I'm getting away from the normal virtual list thing that became important to me, but I'm using them. Virtual lists get used for user interface a lot of times to show you something specific that's custom to that user interface. But I also am using this kind of information a lot, like in script parameters and script results, and passing information around. And so in many ways, I also find, the virtual list, I learned how to do the calculations in the virtual list calculation fields, how to pull that information out. Well, I thought, well, what if I took that another step and I started doing that as a calculation field within a regular table, that I add that as a new unstored calculation field that would be available in a table to say, for this particular record, return me all the information about this particular record. And that's particularly useful when I'm using other scripts and I want to be able to say, a lot of times I'm wanting to go from the context of one place, I want to go somewhere else, but I say, I want to bring all the values of this particular record with me, but I don't want to have to do a SQL that says, bring it all. I just want to always be able to bring it with me. So I said, well, what if I made a field that is like, here we go. Coming up here. Here is what basically turns out here is a long calculation with a couple of whiles in here. So it looks a little nasty. So I'm not expecting everybody to really definitely catch this. But what it does is it goes through a particular record and it says, give me all the fields in this record. And I actually have it only give me the stored fields. You'll find out if you say, give me everything when you got summary fields and other stuff like that, you'll be screwed. But anyway, pardon my language. But I've sat there with the beach ball and force quit FileMaker again. So yes, you don't want your summary fields and calculation fields to go, but which is why you will see when I do a SQL, I say, only give me the normal fields. And so this calculation here goes and says, for this particular table, give me all the field names that are normal field names, not calculated or summary ones, and return those values and put them in a JSON array. And the nice benefit of that is I can, when I'm in here, let me switch back to a table based on that table occurrence. I can say I'm on this El Amir Entertainment. And if I'm, for some reason, wanting to do a script to go somewhere where the context is different, but I would like to bring along that information of that table with me, I can come over here to watch if I can click on this. And here is calling that same field. And just by calling that calculation field, unstored calculation field, I have all of the data that is stored. Now, you will notice that in this particular thing, hardly anything is not stored because the data I actually get from the comptroller is not parsed out. It comes as one long field. So really all you're getting is one field. So if I had included the calculation fields, you would have seen these all parsed out. But so Achilles heel of using this particular example. But yes, what it does is it then returns all of your fields and it lets you know what the values are. And that makes it real easy if you're using a script parameter, say, give me all of these values or bring all of these values with me as I step to other layouts and want to do other things. So now one of the things you will notice is, first of all, I started doing this with field names. And field names are great, except the FileMaker, one of the pluses about FileMaker is the ability to change field names is very easy, and it's very useful to be able to do that. And if you've done much SQL, you've also fought the fact of someone changes a field name, you just broke all my SQL. You know, so then we get around to using the get field name to do our workaround to figure out how to change, you know, field names to figure out, make them kind of, I call it resilient SQL, but anyway, it's where you're using SQL that, here, I'll show you right now. Best to use an example. Resilient SQL up here. Here's my SQL, but you'll notice I'm using these fields from above, and instead of spelling out the name of the field, I say get field name, and then I substitute the semicolons between it. And the first line is going to be the table name. The second line is going to be the field name. And that way, the advantage of this, because I'm using the get field name, is if someone changes this field name, my SQL will continue to work. Okay, so that's something we've covered elsewhere, and I'm not going to get into detail about that, but some of you've already seen that, but we don't have time to do that in detail. But I have the same issue that has come along in, dealing with these virtual, with these tables and dealing with these fields. And so I'm dealing with the same issue over here. So you will see what I did over here was I said, hey, instead of dealing with field names, let's deal with field numbers. So if you look at what came over in this example here is, say originally I had field names, now I have field numbers. Field 44 is actually called data. It's a field that has data in there. This is field 64 is timestamp, whatever. So that's, real useful to FileMaker to make sure things don't change, but it also suddenly doesn't make it really readable because, Heather, what's field 64?
I used to know. It escapes me at the moment.
Those are the internal field.
Yes, the internal field number. So that's useful to a developer, not to an end user, but it's also confusing to developers. So anyway, so this is, I'm working my way through what works and what doesn't work. So I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, well, I got to do something better than that. That is the way I want to do it. So I eventually migrated it to what I have is the SQL ID and field name following it. So I included both in the JSON. That tends to be more useful visually. It does make it more complicated when you're having to loop through and grab things out to realize you've got to grab the field number or the name in it if you're wanting to do something. So, but I resolved on that was better to me as a developer, that even though it takes up more stuff and really all I needed the number, it was a lot more useful for debugging and working with. So I've kind of at this point migrated to this, and this seems to work very well. And but one of the things that I found out, and of course a lot of these things I'm just kind of playing to see what works and what doesn't work, is I found out that when you SQL the schema of FileMaker, seems to work fine, fast for one record in one field. If you try to do it for all the records and fields you're looking at, that is not one of the faster functions FileMaker does, calling the schema. And the reason why is FileMaker has to assume the schema can change at any millisecond, and it has to grab the schema as of that millisecond. Think of it as an unstored field. So, how do we get around, unstored fields? Well, let's go back to our concept before. Well, first of all, we get around by having it stored, but we go back to our global field concept of, let's have, when we start up the computer, let's have it generate the schema and store it in the global field. Well, suddenly, if that schema is stored in a global field, and assuming you haven't done development and changed the schema on the fly, but other assumptions out there is, guess what? You can call that global field and pull the schema out and generate the same data a whole lot faster. So what I'm pulling here, well, okay, that was this way. Let me get it where I'm pulling it using the global fields. And now what we got looks the same here, and for one record doesn't make a difference. But when you start dealing with a lot of them, using that global schema to do instead of the SQL to get the schema is a whole lot faster. So let me go point out the difference of the global versus the SQL schema. So if we go look here, here's with a SQL. So what we have to do here is we have to execute the SQL, and I don't know if this will zoom in for everybody, but I hope it does. But you have to execute the SQL for this particular table to get all the information about the normal fields. And that is a big time penalty if you have to do it a whole bunch of times. However, if you are grabbing the schema from, I have a table out here in my database preferences called Global Schema. That has this it has the schema all in it that was stored on your first window open. And let's go look at that. Let's see. Let's go to, I'm up here, virtual lists. Okay, let's look at the data viewer here and let's look at our schema. And now we have schema global. So here is, for this particular database, all tables and all fields. And this, as a global field, can be called very quickly, at least with JSON. So this makes things go a whole lot faster compared to calling the SQL schema, and that improved things too. So some of the question always gets, what this has made is that particular when I'm moving around within FileMaker and I'm wanting to pull data out of a particular a record to bring that record's information with me, you know, do I want to do it like I've learned from the virtual list? I've gone from the virtual list to learning how to pull this data from a record and bring it with me somewhere. I even learned how to pull a found set, because you can also have your JSON of a record. You could call the same field and make it into a JSON list instead of just that JSON array. And that's useful for moving around. The question always gets back to, you know, is that any faster or better than just calling it directly from FileMaker? So some of the game that I'm playing here is, when is doing this JSON and text manipulation faster than some of the native, you know, FileMaker tools? And it's not always black and white. It's kind of like when SQL came along, you know, I had this naive thing that I said, well, it's SQL's and the biggest databases in SQL. So that means that SQL has to be faster. And so SQL and FileMaker will be faster. And of course, one of the first lessons we all learned is no, not inherently, because, you know, FileMaker is a Draco engine, is not natively SQL, and SQL is just interpreted into FileMaker, the Draco engine. And so you're running an emulation. It does not make it faster. It actually potentially can slow things down, even though I'm fairly impressed with how it does simple SQLs, joins, maxes, mins, stuff like that. You can kill it real quickly. But anyway, so some of this is trying to figure out, you know, we're playing to figure what are the strengths and weaknesses of FileMaker, and when can we use JSON to pull data from one context we have to get over into another context without going over there and just writing the SQL over there to pull it with us. The advantage of this, of having a stored field though in your schema, is that it's real easy for me to say, if I'm over here, to say, hey, you know, grab me all the fields and their names from this particular record, and all I have to do is call one field, and it automatically goes right into my script parameters, and that makes it a lot easier when I'm writing script parameters to pass data, at least in the JSON format. So to that degree, it does make things faster. I'm still doing testing to see, you know, is that faster or slower than doing it some other ways where you get over there. It does simplify some development work in that it makes it easy that I know when I go over into my other script, you know, the subscript or somewhere else or some other context, that I have all of this data from a previous context with me, and it's easy to bring. I guess the question could be is, what's the difference between having maybe a second window that you put off screen and that you go back and forth between? I mean, there's all kinds of, you know, it's FileMaker, so there are 50 million ways to do the same thing. A lot of times the question is, which is the fastest? And sometimes the answer is not, is there always a fastest? Sometimes one's faster, and in some certain situations, and some's faster than others. Like some of us, we've learned FileMaker does real well with tables that have shorter number of fields. In other words, you do better having FileMaker with multiple tables joined with the same key that are shorter than if you had one table that has, several hundred fields in it, there's a penalty that FileMaker pays as it gets longer and longer. But have we all done that? Yeah, do we all have ugly schema that we wished we're embarrassed if anybody ever looked at what we did a few years ago? Yeah. So anyway, so a lot of this is playing around with virtual lists, going to how it can be used to pull data, not only for a particular user interface's unique experience, but also how to pull data along using JSON in script parameters and script results to move things around when you're doing scripting. So it's more than just, a virtual list of what you're going to see for a user interface, but that's why I say it's kind of a twist of, where I did some other things on it. So anyway, that kind of concludes where I have been on the experimenting on it. So I'm going to open it up to questions. So anybody awake that's on the virtual list out there? Got any questions? Did I?
You got everything you need.
You have to unmute yourself. That may be one of the things you're going to have to do. Well, I can unmute them. I wonder if I can unmute all, but we might regret that.
I see a mute all. I don't see none.
So.
Well, I have a question.
Okay, Heather's got a question.
Okay, so, and I apologize because I was late coming in here. And so I've had some things to do while you've been talking, and I may have missed something here. But when you were talking about the let me rephrase. Can you explain your reasoning for using field IDs in your JSON? What was the advantage of doing that?
Okay, actually it's twofold.
Okay.
First of all, I did it because I know the field names can change. But there was another benefit
Please do tell.
that goes over into the virtual lists.
Okay.
And the virtual lists are based on field 1, 2, 3, 4, Okay. Well, guess what? When you do
Could you
a
repeat your
SQL,
question?
okay. The question is, what is the benefit of using field IDs instead of field names? And as explained in the SQL concept, you get to see a name instead of a field ID. But if someone changes a field name, then if you're using IDs, you don't have to worry that someone changed a field name. So that's one plus. But actually, that wasn't the thing that pushed me over to using field IDs. It was the virtual list actually pushed me over, because virtual lists are done by field 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And they come over in your JSON or your carry return separated thing, whatever, in that particular order. And when I'm calling things by JSON, when we switch over to doing the JSON thing, one thing that FileMaker does is JSON puts things in sorted order.
Yeah.
Okay. So suddenly I don't control the order of those fields. It's how JSON puts it. And the sort order is, if you've named things just by the field name, well, it's sorted by how the field is named. So suddenly what I was expecting in this virtual field to be field 2 suddenly is field 3 or something.
Okay.
And it breaks my user interface. And I was like, who broke my user interface? How did that happen? Then I find out someone's changed the field name. It's like, oh, but I thought I had built this resiliently so that wouldn't happen because I wrote my SQL that way, and then I realized, oh, but the JSON was screwing me.
You're collecting the field ID when you're collecting the other data at the same time?
Yes.
Okay, because the first thing that came to my mind is that FileMaker field IDs can change.
Right.
If you take a field or a group of fields from one table and you copy and paste them into another table, they're the same fields, but they're going to have different IDs. If you upgrade your file or you take a file and you attach it and start using it, you can have, I've had instances where the field ID will change.
Yes, you have to.
And you experience this as a problem most often when an import breaks.
Yes.
You know,
Also, vertical solution people have that problem a lot. Gerard's on here, I've got this, template here and I'm going to come over this template. And I'm going to edit this field. Oh, I didn't mean that. Let me put it in a second time, a second way. Well, when you come over here, guess what? It's got the ID number from before, not the new, anyway.
Or a field gets deleted in the middle and then or a field gets deleted and someone goes, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And they put it back, right?
It doesn't go back with the same number.
It doesn't come back with the same number.
Right.
So there's any number. So, but I didn't realize you were gathering those numbers at the same time that you're gathering the data. So those problems are non-issue.
I'm gathering at the schema. I'm putting it in the global schema. I used to grab it by making a SQL call each time, which was bad.
Right.
So learn that lesson. So we're kind of experimenting, and that's also why, if you noticed in my the data viewer here, when I did show this here, let's see. No, I'm not in the right. Got to switch over here. You'll notice that what I did was I put the ID number before the name, and I had to also give it leading zeros so that things would sort as a number, so that the JSON wouldn't throw it out of order on me. So, but once I did that, then I didn't have the problem of field names changing, affecting this JSON data being passed as script parameters or being used as a virtual list somewhere. So, basically, a lot of these things are, what FileMaker is usually trying to hide from us, but we're trying to sometimes do things outside of just what FileMaker tells us we can do. Right. So this is, it was not inherently the type of thing that FileMaker was looking at. They're probably saying, hey, we want things to just come over in a layout or be by a relationship or whatever. And so this is, well, sometimes the context isn't the way, it's set up, or I don't want to tie all these things together and make my whole thing a spider web. I want to make it, more anchor buoy-ish because it performs better. And, there's the reasons why we do these kind of workaround things. So anyway, so some of the things I learned here was, use field IDs to fix both the SQL problem as well as the JSON sorting problem, when you return a JSON array, so that things will be sorted in the same order, hopefully. Do, have the caveat about fields IDs can change. If you, copy field, delete it and paste it back, you have a new ID, so that can throw you off on things. But I tend to find the bigger problem I dealt with in working, this usually happens when you're on the same project with someone else, is, a field name changing is more of a problem than field ID changing. But yes, IDs can change, and that is a caveat to this. And this does not fix that problem. So anyway, it's just an interesting way to look at things. I'm actually going to put this template up on my templates database out there. It's not there yet, but if there are other people want to see and play around with it, this is, to a degree, I don't know how much you want to use it or anything, but it's something as a, something to play and, see what I've done. The templates database, and we'll send this out to everybody. This is my webpage, tms.us. Click the contact us. It takes us over to WebDirect, and these are the templates. I got a bunch of free templates out here, everything from barcoding to currency things, full calendar, whatever. They're free there's no licensing fee for me. And now a lot of them that have to do with APIs, if you're going to use the API, you got to pay money for, but I can't do anything about that. So, but I will put I'm going to call it a twist on virtual lists, and I'll put it up here sometime in the next week, and we'll see that it's out there if you guys want to play more. And maybe some of you guys will have some suggestions on what I've done on these, JSON and describing a record in a way that's easy to move around to virtual lists or in script parameters. It's just kind of playing and seeing what solutions that will solve. So, okay, any other questions out there? Okay. Well,
Taylor?
Yes.
Is this where I ask my question?
This is where you ask your question.
Hello, my name is Richard Sutterfield. And long time ago, in a galaxy far away, I attended the FMPUG group meetings. I remember Dennis and of course Taylor. And I've been asked to make a database. Has anybody ever heard that before? And in doing so, I'm going to require probably some hosting to get it up and available to all the users. So Taylor kind of emailed me and said, maybe the FileMaker server hosting service is not the best because of where it is located compared to where we are here in Texas. So I'm going to ask and put it out there, recommendations on a hosting service somewhere we could put a file up and pay a nominal, reasonable fee. Free's fine too, but you know, I don't think that's going to work.
Okay, so who's got recommendations for, this is a Dallas hosted area one, right?
Correct.
Well,
Okay,
I'll
so
speak to that if you want.
go for it, Dennis.
Okay, so I don't think it really matters that it's specifically in Dallas. If your internet speed is decent, you can access a hosted server pretty much anywhere in North America and have speed that is pretty much the same. I know I've talked to Michael Strange about his analysis of different speeds and different servers, but for what you're doing, if you're just starting out with a database, what you want is reliability, and reliability is probably inversely proportional to cost. I remember long ago, there was a fellow in Tennessee who was advertising $10 a month, but you get what you pay for. And very often for $10 a month, your database wasn't necessarily secure and it wasn't necessarily available. Will Porter is a big advocate of FM hosting pros, and they give him a good deal on price and reasonable access to administer it. Each provider has a different set of controls that they give you. So one that you might consider is, do you or don't you get access to the FileMaker server admin console? Do you or don't you have the ability to run your plugins? Or do you or don't you have the ability to manage your backups? Something that always mattered a great deal to me was, do I have desktop access to that server? And not all the hosting providers will give you that. I'll give you another tip. Years ago, I started using, for occasional hosting that didn't require a long-term contract, a company called Mac Stadium, because what they were doing is renting Macintosh servers, usually Mac Minis, and you could do it on a monthly basis. And I think in those days I was paying $79. I think it may be a little bit more now. I know they purchased a total of 14,000 of the new M1 Mac Minis last year. So they may be charging a little more for those faster servers. But when you have that kind of a subscription in their company, you get to install FileMaker Server at your own expense. And then you can run it as if it was your own server, but it's just hosted in a cloud where there's good electricity and air conditioning and backup and tech support, so that you don't have to worry about the operation of the machine. But you are responsible for running it as your own server. So there's a choice that you get. If you want to take responsibility to run your own server, that's a good solution. If you want someone else to be running the server and you just want to have access to the database, then something like FM Hosting Pros takes a lot of that burden off your shoulders. I think that's the end of my speech.
Very good. Was that, say that last one, was it Mac Stadium?
Yeah, Mac Stadium has a location in Atlanta, Georgia, and a location in Las Vegas. Those are the two North America locations. They also have one in Ireland, and I think there's some other places around the world right now. So when I was in Dallas, I thought the Atlanta location may have been a little bit closer to me than Las Vegas. When I moved to Denver last summer, I decided to put one of my surplus Mac Minis into Mac Stadium with what they call a co-hosting subscription. So I sent them the machine, and for that they charge only $54 a month to run it. But again, it's my machine. I'm responsible for doing FileMaker server upgrades when necessary. You know, if something goes wrong, it's on me, not on them. Their responsibility is just to have electricity to keep it running. And for the $54, I think I paid an extra $10 to have an external USB hard drive there, so I could have my backups that are external to the machine, if not external to their facility.
Okay.
Much help for Windows, but they do run VMware if you want to run virtualization, a little more money. Go to their website, you'll see all kinds of options that they have. And other than FM Hosting Pros, I'm sure there's others around. That's just the only one I have memorized right now.
Okay. This is a good start.
I have a comment to add to that.
Okay, Heather's got a comment. Speak loudly so they can hear you.
Okay, so regarding the preference for something local, in my experience, it's rare, if ever, that you actually need to like physically deliver something to the hosting site. So location for that reason, for convenience purpose, is not really important, but it can be important for continuity of service. So we're not as prone here in the Dallas area to natural disasters like on the East Coast where we had hurricanes. You know, when I was in North Carolina with clients in South Carolina on the coast, it was real important that the backup services, for example, were not regionally close by. You know, if your town gets knocked out by one natural disaster, so is your host. Now, we're not as prone to that, but if you found a great hosting service in the same office building that you were in, but it got hit by a tornado, you know, your hosting, your service is down, probably your backups are gone, you know, you're toast. So it's a good idea to actually consider hosting sites that are not in your neighborhood.
Republican issue. So why do oppose the January commission?
So there's an example of talking about maybe not being close to where you are might be a reason to do that, to host, because of it's, you know, if your area goes down, of course, I guess the assumption is that you're pulling some of the backups to your location periodically, so that if that, you know, every location can be subject to.
On where your customers are located, right? Who's going to be using the system? Because if everyone is going to be using it, let's say there were a power grid failure. I don't know, that's never happened.
February.
There's a power grid failure and everyone who's using the system is on the same grid. Well, then it's not a really big deal that it's down. They're down too and they're not going to access it. But if they're not in your region, if they're somewhere else that isn't going to be affected, they're going to be down because your area is down.
Okay.
I should have mentioned for Richard that the FileMaker Cloud option exists, but that might be overkill for what he wants to do when he's just starting up a database. Of course, Claris will probably tell him that that's not true and it's easy and inexpensive and all of those cool adjectives.
Yeah. Very good.
Let's just, well, I'll comment on the FileMaker Cloud one because I've got some experience using it. It certainly is a premier service. What they do very well. It is excellent. They run their own directory service. So that's very secure. It also becomes an Achilles heel in many ways. It is what kept them for a long time, even allowing you to do easily such things as schedule scripts or, you know, some other basic admin API, data API access. Just literally a couple of weeks ago, they've only just then started even being able to make you to easily do the schedule scripts through their admin console, which is a step in the right direction, but it's hard to believe we went this far and people were paying that much money for not having it. So I felt a little burned by my experience on the FileMaker's hosting cloud, but maybe that'll improve. I think they did get a lot of feedback and they were slow to respond, but they seem to have done some responding, but it would not be on my top list of recommended hosting, but I do see that it's improving. So I will say FileMaker is clearly, it's a client server solution. And because of it, the communication between the client and the server when you're using FileMaker Pro is heavily impacted by latency. Latency is basically ping speed between you and that server. So while you can host somewhere else far away, latency always has some dependence on distance. And for example, here I'm here at the Harmonic Data Studios, and I just hit my TMS software server. And as you can see here, I got a latency of 4.3 milliseconds. That's pretty good. Down Love Field area. So Fred was asking, where's my server? I was saying it's down near the Love Field Airport. So it's probably about 8 miles away from here or something, 8 or 10, so not far. So that is something that if you hit, well, a lot of people really push the Amazon servers, which the FileMaker Cloud is on too. But those servers are all on the coast. They're either in Virginia or they're, you know, Los Angeles, Seattle, Portland, or whatever, all on the West Coast. And so none of those are close to the middle of the USA, which Texas is in. So Amazon servers, in my opinion, just due to latency, are not the premier service. And I would say wherever you're going to look, you should be testing latency out ahead of time and make sure you're getting some good numbers. See, for example, here within the Dallas area, I'm getting 4.3 milliseconds. If you can get something under, you know, 7 milliseconds, you're probably okay. But if you start getting stuff higher up, it will affect your performance more than the bandwidth. A lot of people just want to measure bandwidth on your internet speed. Within FileMaker being a chatty type of application, client server application, you need to pay attention to latency. So distance will matter. Check out your ping servers to whatever server you're talking to and realize the higher you get, the slower it'll perform. If you can get down in the 2 or 3 milliseconds, you'd be really happy. That's what you mostly get on a local area network. But you know, you can see just within Dallas, I'm getting 4.3 milliseconds. So I would certainly want to try a ping test to whatever server you're going to put to if it's not in the Dallas area to say, what's my ping rate going to be, and am I, you know, is it something reasonable? So keep that in mind when weighing things. There's obviously a lot of factors on things, but I will say I've used FM Hosting Pros, which Dr. Will Porter uses, and I've been happy with them. They've been a very reasonably priced economical choice. They've been hosting in Atlanta, but I think they've been moving to Virginia under Amazon. So, you know, you won't get as low of latency, but they're good. But I don't know any hosting companies that are specific to FileMaker in Dallas. I think you always just have to host your own computer here and put your own, you know, FileMaker server on it and administer it yourself. So unless, you know, Scott, do you know of any? I mean, you were downtown.
I don't know of any right now. I've used FMP hosts and they've been pretty good as well. But you're right, there's some latency that just happens, and when you start getting latency that's like hundreds of milliseconds, then you're going to actually start impacting user experience.
Big time, yes. So, okay.
All right.
Well,
Well, I was just going to say, I've been out of FileMaker for almost 3 or 4 years now. I think 16 is the current version I have. So, is it still the client? You buy the client and then it connects to the server? Is that the concept that it still works that way?
Yes, that's client server. set up, the question you're going to look at is if you're old school, you're used to perpetual licensing. And FileMaker is really trying to move away from perpetual licensing. They want to have some money from you every year, and they generally price things to have the smallest they really do, I think, is 5 users. Do they do any 3-user ones anymore? I think it's just 5 users.
We have a legacy client for 3.
Yeah,
I think 5 is where.
I think the
5
cheap
is there.
5, but the 5 includes the server, and that's around just a little under $1,000 a year. Otherwise, I mean, the FileMaker client by itself is almost $500 now, isn't it? If you're doing a perpetual license. So, Richard's like, oh.
I don't remember that being that expensive back 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, it's it's certainly the entry level point has moved up on a FileMaker from what it used to be. Yes, you are recognizing that.
And that would be, the 500 would be per user. They would
Yes,
have
if
each
you're
have
buying-
a client.
And that would be without a server.
Okay. But
Or
the hosting
no.
would take care of the server, right?
No. This is
Oh,
just the license.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, you can get something a little under $100 a month with FMP Hosting Pros. So you're looking, if you're doing $100 a month for hosting, you're looking at $1,200 a year, and you're looking for just under $1,000 a year from Claris. So really, to do FileMaker server with clients, the entry point of 5 being the minimum, you're looking at at least $2,200 a year plus tax and whatever.
Okay.
So
I think you've answered my question.
okay. Well, just want to be upfront so that you're not surprised when you dive in.
Yeah.
They're doing some wonderful things, but it certainly isn't the entry level alternative. And you might want to go back. While I really like what FileMaker does, it certainly isn't the inexpensive solution to get in on things. Dr. Will Porter did a presentation, I think last spring or something, about some alternatives to FileMaker. None of them really which are as good as FileMaker, but sometimes your needs aren't as much as FileMaker is. You might want to check out, a lot of those are web, where you develop and do everything on the web as a web service. And then, and so those are some options too that tend to be less expensive. You have less control and more issues with things like scripting, but if your need isn't what FileMaker is, sometimes FileMaker's not the answer to everything, but
Sure.
sometimes it is, and just take those on. We go check out to the webpage fmpugdallas.com. Here it is right here, and let's see where was Dr. Will's. He called it is 2020 the year to kiss FileMaker goodbye. Really, it was alternatives to FileMaker. So, but anyway, check that video out.
Conclusion, I think, is it was not the year to kiss FileMaker.
Yeah, it was the COVID year, and he hadn't predicted it right. But anyway.
Very good.
Okay.
Well, you've answered my question.
Okay. Hope that helps out. So any other questions out there? Okay. If there are any other questions, next month, Gerard Butler is going to give us a presentation on his new Pool Pro software as it has to do with Kanbans and calendars and things like that, and web viewers, and using some of the new FileMaker scripting controls to interact FileMaker with a web viewer. Kind of cool stuff, I have to say. I've taken a look at some of what he's done, so I'm interested in looking a little more at some of that and some of the options. He runs a big vertical solution, and so part of it was how to get the pricing right that works when you're going to have a lot of users. So anyway, it shall be an interesting presentation next month, and we look forward to having all of you there. If some of you want to sign up for Pause on Air, do that too. And something we will have Engage will happen this month also on the 25th, I think it is. That will be virtual. So we'll.
How many of our DFW brethren will be at
Pause on air. Heather's going. I'm going. Let's see who else is going.
Daisy's going.
Daisy's
and
going.
Veronica and Eric's coming on.
And Eric's going. Anybody else in our group going? Greg, I don't think you could go. Dr. Will was thinking about it. So as a couple of weeks ago, he's a maybe, but maybe we'll twist one of your other arms into going. So
There is one other person from the area.
Heather's looking up who the people are that go on there. She's got the web page. She's on the inside connection here.
Oh, my mind's a blank. Beyond Chaos.
Oh, Susan.
Yes,
Penema.
Susan Penema.
Penema, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
Susan Penema.
Uh-oh, the women are going to outnumber the men. Woo-hoo.
Wow, there's a for you.
So, okay, well, we hope to see all of you next month. I appreciate everybody being here. This presentation is recorded. We will stick it up on our webpage if you want to go back and nitpick through things. And obviously, if you got any comments or follow-ups, feel free to send them to me. I would like to hear them and see if you got some other creative ideas on how to twist around the virtualist twists and JSON and whatnot. So good to see all of you. Take care.
So long, farewell.